Greetings and welcome back to Haftarot, the weekly video cast in which we look at the upcoming week's Haftara, analyzing it, getting a sense of what it's about, and seeing why it is the appropriate Haftara for that week's reading. My name is Yitzchak Etshalom, and I'm delighted to be looking at the Haftara of this week of Parashat Vayigash together with you. Parashat Vayigash, the Haftara selected for Parashat Vayigash, comes from the book of Yechezkel, and this is our first Haftara from the book of Yechezkel. We will have a number of them during the course of the year. So it's probably an appropriate time for us to get a little bit of an introduction to Yechezkel. And as I pointed out here in the few words about section, Yechezkel is the one Navi whose entire career is spent outside of Israel. Matter of fact, that brings up a problem. As you see here in the Gemara in Moed Katan, Patach ale Rabbi Abba Rui Haya Rabbeinu shetishre alav shchina. Ella shebavel garmale. So Rabbi Abba says about Rav, evidently, that our teacher really should have had the spirit of prophecy on him. But the fact is he's outside of Israel, he's in Bavel. Meiti Rav Nachman bar Chisda, v'amri la Rav Chanan bar Chisda. So there was a challenge brought. Hayo hayad var Adonai Yechezkel ben Buzia Kohen beretz kastim. As you see in the first passage of Yechezkel above, it says that indeed the word of Hashem came to Yechezkel ben Buzia Kohen in Eretz Kasdim. In other words, there's prophecy outside of Israel. Tafach le avua besandale. So he hit him, Rav Chisda hit him with his shoe. This is one of the sons of Rav Chisda said this. Amar le lava minelach lo titrud alma. He said, didn't I tell you not to bother people? In other words, this son was speaking out of turn. But that's because his critique was out of place. Why? My haya shekvar haya kvar. So why does it say hayo hayad dvar Adonai Yechezkel? The word of Hashem came to Yechezkel, or the word of Hashem had come to Yechezkel. It's because the only reason he had prophecy in Bavel, because he had already had prophecy in Israel, that he'd come from Israel, left for Bavel, perhaps as one of the exiles in the 6th century BCE, and then he continued to have prophecy in Bavel. However, in the entire book of Yechezkel, he is in Bavel. We don't hear about him being in Israel, although many of his visions take him in a dreamlike state to Yerushalayim. He sees the Mikdash, he sees all sorts of very bizarre things. And Yechezkel is also the Navi who, more than any other Navi, is asked to do strange things, to lie on one side for 390 days, on another side for 40 days, to eat very strange food. His wife is taken from him and he's told not to mourn. All sorts of very odd things that Yechezkel does. And Yechezkel has a very famous vision, which we will get to Pesach time because it will be the Haftara of Shabbat Pesach. And that is the first half of this chapter, which is the vision of the Valley of the Dry Bones. And immediately following that, we have this vision where Hashem speaks to him and says, Adam kach lecha eitz echad. This is the normal nomenclature used when Hashem speaks to Yechezkel, son of man, Ben Adam. Take one tree, one piece of wood, uchtov alav liYehuda, write the name Yehuda on it. V'livnei Yisrael chaverav, and for the rest of Bnei Yisrael who are the members of Yehuda, that Binyamin perhaps. L'kach eitz echad uchtov alav liYosef eitz Ephraim, and take another piece of wood and write on it Yosef eitz Ephraim. Meaning in all of the other tribes that are connected to Yosef, which is Yisachar and Zvulun and Asher, etc. Basically Ephraim and Menashe. And then the message of this is to take these two woods and bring them together and turn them into one piece of wood. Now there's all in a vision, so it can happen. And they become one in your hand. And then when people are going to ask you, which means the sense is this is going to happen in real time, and people are going to see it, and they're going to ask you, what does this mean? This is the message you give them. I'm taking the wood, the tree of Yosef. I'm going to put the wood of Yehuda on top of it. I'm going to turn it into one wood or one tree. And they will become one in my hand. And the whole point of this message is to unite the northern kingdom and the southern kingdom. And there are three messages that course through the rest of this Haftarah. Remember that we're talking about a period after the destruction of the Beit HaMikdash, after Yehuda has been exiled, and 140 years earlier, the northern tribes had been exiled and lost. And at this time, there is still hope that those northern tribes will be returned, but will be returned not to the north, but will return to be included in the one nation of Yehuda, of Yisrael, the single nation. And it'll bring Yosef, which represents the north, and Yehuda, which represents the south together, but Yehuda will be on top of Yosef. And as we read several times later on in this Haftara, that the people will then have David as their king. Now, why did they pick David here? David is dead, he's not coming back. Why mention that David will be their king? David, Avdi Melech Alehem, my servant David will be king, because David was the king that all of the tribes came to. Take a look in Shmuel Bet Parakeh. All of the tribes come to David in Hebron and say, please be our king. And David is king over all of Am Yisrael. He's really the only one, because already in Shlomo's time, there is a sense of rebellion. And when Shlomo dies, the kingdoms are split and they're never reunited. And so this is a vision to go back to those times. And the three themes that happen are the unity of the tribes, the connection to the house of David, which comes along with that, and then Hashem putting his Shekhinah, his Mikdash, among the people. And those three go together, because without the people uniting, and without the people uniting under David, under a Davidic king, they cannot have the Shekhinah come back. And this is the vision that Yechezkel shares with them. Now, what does this have to do with Vayigash? It's actually quite straightforward. Vayigash starts and Vayigash ends with a message of unity. It starts with Yehuda standing up on behalf of his brother Binyamin to the wicked king of Egypt, who has framed Binyamin and is going to keep him as a slave. It turns out that wicked king is none other than Yosef, who is playing a game. It's not exactly a game. It's a charade for many different possible purposes. And Yehuda finally, through his tremendous plea to Yosef, has Yosef reveal himself, and the family is reunited. The family then comes down to Egypt, and that happens in this parasha, and Yaakov and Yosef are tearfully reunited after all of those years, and ultimately they all reside together in exile, but they all reside together as a single family, and the core is created in this week's parasha for the expansion from a small family into a tribe that becomes a nation. And that's the vision that happens in this week's Haftara of Yehuda and Yosef. Yehuda, the challenger from Canaan, Yosef, entrenched in Mitzrayim, already in exile, and those two parts of the family to come together. That's what's going to happen in future times, when those two parts of the nation will come together. And Amir Hashem, soon we will all be united in a real sense of Achdut. Shabbat Shalom, and enjoy the Haftarah.